What if dogs weren't just pets, but spiritual messengers? For centuries we've called them man's best friend. But the famed sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce saw something far deeper. He claimed dogs are evolving souls, here not just to comfort us, but to help awaken us. In a world unraveling with emotional disconnection, anxiety, and spiritual crises, dogs are showing up not just as companions, but as healers, teachers, and even soul mirrors. This isn't just sentimental fluff. It's a prophetic vision that's unfolding now. So before you scroll past or dismiss your dog's deep gaze as just instinct, ask yourself, what if they remember something we forgot? Most people know Edgar Cayce as the sleeping prophet, a man who, while in a trance, delivered thousands of readings on topics from healing to ancient civilizations. But what's lesser known is what he said about animals, and especially about dogs. In the early 20th century, Cayce gave over 14,000 documented psychic readings, and among them, scattered like puzzle pieces, were glimpses of a spiritual evolution, not just for humans, but for all living beings. Cayce believed animals possess souls and evolution, that they are not merely instinctual creatures but spiritual entities on a long path of growth, just like us. He stated, quote, "All souls, in whatever form they manifest, are moving toward the One." To Cayce, the animal kingdom wasn't beneath us, it was walking alongside us on a parallel journey of consciousness. But dogs held a special place. In several readings, Cayce hinted that certain animals, especially dogs, were expressions of loyalty, service, and unconditional love, traits that humans struggle to master. He believed dogs were often drawn to human energy fields and that their connection to us wasn't random, it was karmic. That means the dog sleeping beside you may have chosen you, or maybe you chose them before either of you were born. Cayce even implied that some dogs might be souls who had once incarnated in other forms, even human, and are now returning to learn, heal, or teach in ways that only unconditional love can. It's not reincarnation in the way we often think of it, as a linear ladder, but a vast spiraling journey where the soul takes on whatever form best serves its next lesson. He also believed that animals absorb our pain, not just physically, but energetically, that they act as sponges for trauma, soaking up the emotional debris we suppress. Ever noticed how a dog lies beside you when you're sad or follows you around when you're anxious? That isn't just behavior, Cayce would say, it's service. And what's more, he warned that the way we treat animals reflects the state of our collective soul. To ignore their consciousness or to exploit them, he believed, was a kind of spiritual blindness. But to recognize their light, to truly see them as fellow travelers, was to begin awakening our own divine nature. Cayce's prophecy wasn't that dogs would suddenly rise up and speak or gain intellect like humans. It was more subtle, more profound. He saw a future where humanity would finally realize that consciousness exists on many levels, and that animals, especially those who live closest to us, are evolving too. So when Cayce spoke of the soul's journey, he included all life in that vision. And in this unfolding age, where emotional distress and spiritual disconnection are at an all-time high, it's not surprising that dogs are emerging as silent guardians of the human heart. Maybe they've always known what we forgot, that love, loyalty, and presence are not just qualities, they are portals back to the soul. And perhaps the reason they look at us with such depth is because they're waiting for us to finally look back and see them. It's no coincidence that in a time of global emotional collapse, dogs are everywhere. In hospitals, they sit beside the dying. In schools, they walk quietly between children with trauma. In homes, they lay at the feet of the lonely. And for those teetering on the edge of despair, they're often the only living being standing between a heartbeat and the unthinkable. This isn't a trend, it's a response. Humanity is undergoing what some mystics call a soul drought. an age where attention is abundant, but connection is scarce. We scroll endlessly, swipe past real faces, speak in texts, not in truth. And as we drift further from ourselves, dogs are pulling us back. Edgar Cayce said that animals, particularly those close to humans, would begin to take on emotional roles in alignment with our spiritual growth. He spoke of a time when the veil between beings would thin and where certain animals would become mirrors, reflecting our deepest needs. That time is now. Consider this. A veteran returns home, scarred not on the outside, but within. The silence of war follows him. He no longer connects, no longer sleeps. Medications help, but something's missing, something deeply human: trust. Then he's introduced to a therapy dog, a golden retriever trained not in commands but in presence. This dog doesn't talk, doesn't diagnose, but he senses. When the veteran's heart rate rises, the dog leans in. When nightmares stir, he rests his head on the soldier's chest. And slowly, connection is rebuilt, not with words, but with a gaze, a breath, a shared silence. What science calls emotional support, Cayce might call soul alignment. In another home, a child on the autism spectrum struggles to make eye contact, to speak, to trust the world. He won't talk to his parents, his teachers, anyone. But then, a large, gentle dog walks in, and something happens. The child touches the dog's fur, then looks into its eyes. For the first time, he speaks, soft. His parents weep, because something in the dog reached beyond language, into a realm where only energy and intention matter. Cayce believed that animals could communicate soul to soul, not through speech, but through what he called vibratory understanding. Dogs live in that state. They don't wait for you to explain your trauma, they just feel it and respond. Have you ever noticed how a dog can walk into a room and sense the energy? They gravitate to the person in pain. Avoid the one who's agitated. Stay close to the grieving, even if they don't understand why. This isn't instinct, it's intuition. Cayce taught that humans are not the only ones with psychic sensitivity. Animals, especially those bonded to humans, absorb energy. They carry it, transmute it. In fact, he warned, animals can sometimes become sick by absorbing too much of their owner's suppressed emotions. They don't do it out of obligation. They do it out of unconditional love. In the spiritual view, dogs are not just passive companions. They are energy workers, emotional guardians, living reminders of the version of ourselves we've buried beneath ego and noise. And maybe that's why we're drawn to them, especially now, because dogs don't care who you pretend to be. They don't care how much money you make, how broken you feel, how chaotic your past is. They meet you where you are and love you anyway. Isn't that what all of us are searching for? Cayce saw a shift coming, one where human evolution wouldn't be measured by intelligence or technology, but by our ability to feel, connect, and love. And in that process, dogs, and perhaps other animals, would become essential bridges, not because they become more like us, but because we begin to remember that we were once more like them. He said that animals come into our lives not by chance, but by divine timing, and that some of them, especially dogs, may be soul companions, traveling with us across lifetimes, appearing in forms that best serve our healing. So the dog lying beside you now, the one that appeared just when you needed them most, maybe they're not just a pet, maybe they're part of your soul contract. A gentle reminder that even in your darkest hour, you were never really alone. In a world where emotion is often hidden behind screens and filtered faces, dogs show up raw, present, and real. And maybe that's what Cayce foresaw all along. That the great emotional shift of humanity wouldn't come through sermons or soft, but through the silent, sacred presence of a creature who already knows how to love unconditionally. Maybe dogs aren't evolving to become more like us. Maybe we're being called to become more like them. If you've ever looked into a dog's eyes during your worst moment and felt a strange kind of peace wash over you, like they understood without needing words, then you've already met a healer. Not the kind that wears a white coat, not the kind that prescribes or diagnoses, but the kind that enters your world quietly and leaves it forever changed. Edgar Cayce believed that animals, especially dogs, had the potential to heal not just the body, but the soul. He described animals as channels through which universal energy could flow, what he often referred to as life force or creative energy. And dogs, he said, were especially attuned to human suffering, not just because of genetics or domestication, but because of a deeper, ancient bond of energetic entanglement. Take the story of Sarah, a woman battling deep depression after losing her child. For months she barely spoke. Friends stopped visiting. The house grew silent. Nothing reached her. Until one morning a stray dog wandered into her yard. Thin, trembling, but persistent. She gave him food, thinking he'd leave. He didn't. Instead, he curled up by her front door, day after day, until finally she let him in. What followed wasn't magic. It was slow, mundane, miraculous healing. The dog would sit with her as she cried, nudge her when she hadn't eaten, sleep beside her when nightmares returned. Months passed. Sarah began talking again, not to people but to him. Words she couldn't say to a therapist, she whispered into his fur. Eventually her voice returned. Her will to live followed. That dog didn't rescue her from a burning building. He did something far harder. He stayed. Cayce would say, "This isn't coincidence. It's cosmic choreography." He believed animals, especially dogs, are sometimes drawn into our lives not as pets but as teachers, as soul companions sent to guide us through our darkest initiations. And their lessons, they're not wrapped in words or theories. They're taught in silence, a lesson in presence, the way a dog can sit beside you for hours asking nothing but to exist with you. A lesson in forgiveness, how a dog, mistreated and abandoned, can still love the next person fully. A lesson in resilience, how they keep moving forward, tail wagging, heart open, no matter the scars they carry. Science might call it behavior, but Cayce called it spiritual reflection. Dogs showing us the best parts of ourselves we've forgotten. And sometimes they reflect our pain, so we can finally face it. There are countless stories of dogs detecting cancer before doctors, alerting owners to seizures before they occur, sensing heart attacks, or even predicting death in nursing homes by curling up next to those who are about to pass. These aren't flukes. Cayce believed that animals are attuned to vibrational shifts far subtler than human perception, that they exist partly in this world and partly in the energetic fabric that underlies all things. They don't just notice sickness, they feel the imbalance, and they often step in as healers, not to stop death, but to soften its sting, to walk us across thresholds we fear to face alone. There's a hospice nurse named Mark who tells the story of a dog named Willow. She wasn't trained, just lived at the facility. But each time a patient was near the end, Willow knew. She'd enter their room, quietly curl up at the foot of the bed and stay. Not for attention, not for reward, just to be there. One day a patient asked Mark, "Do you think she's an angel?" Mark smiled and said, "If she is, she has paws." Cayce might have agreed. Maybe not an angel in the traditional sense, but certainly a spirit, helper, acting out the highest form of service, compassion without agenda. But dogs don't just heal sickness. They heal the daily ache, the silent spiritual corrosion caused by a world that often feels cold, mechanical, and indifferent. They pull us back into our bodies, into the present moment, into the space where healing begins. One of Cayce's most powerful teachings was that healing begins with alignment between the body, the mind, and the soul. And sometimes, it takes a creature outside of us. One who doesn't speak, who doesn't judge, to bring those pieces back together. Maybe that's why we trust dogs with our children, why we talk to them like they understand, why we feel safer with them around. Because in a strange and beautiful way, they do understand. Maybe not our language, but our frequency, our intention, our pain. Edgar Cayce once said, "All life is one, and the sooner man awakens to that fact, the sooner will he begin to find harmony." Dogs, it seems, are already living that truth. They don't need to wake up. They're already awake to love, to presence, to the essence of being that we're still chasing through philosophies and self-help books. And if we let them, they'll lead us there. Maybe your dog didn't come into your life because you needed a pet. Maybe they came because your soul whispered for a teacher, and the universe responded in fur, paws, and eyes that don't look at you, they look into you. So next time they sit beside you quietly, without expectation, remember, they may not speak our language, but they just might be here to help us remember our own soul. Edgar Cayce wasn't just a prophet of light, he was a prophet of consequence. For every healing insight, there was a warning. For every glimpse of soul evolution, there was a mirror held up to humanity's darker tendencies, a challenge. And when it came to animals, particularly those closest to us, Cayce's message was clear. How we treat them is how we treat the sacred. In multiple readings, Cayce insisted that animals, especially domesticated ones, weren't placed in our lives randomly. They were entrusted to us. He said, "The soul that misuses or abuses the life entrusted to it shall answer for that, not as punishment, but as a law of energy, of karma, of resonance. Just as kindness expands consciousness, cruelty fractures it. And the way we engage with the most innocent among us, those who cannot speak, cannot retaliate, cannot defend, reveals the true spiritual maturity of a person and a civilization." And that's where the warning begins. Because we live in a world where animals are often commodified, neglected, and discarded like old furniture. Even dogs, the very beings we call family, are abandoned in shelters by the thousands every single day. Some are euthanized quietly, others die afraid, wondering what they did wrong, and still others are used, tested on, chained, broken for entertainment or ego. Cayce would not have seen this as merely a moral issue. He would have seen it as spiritual regression. Because the moment we ignore the life force in another being is the moment we become blind to our own. He taught that everything, human, animal, plant, stone, exists on a continuum of consciousness, and that cruelty against lower forms of life was an illusion, because in the grand design there is no lower, only different expressions of the same divine breath. Imagine this: a man walks by a stray dog, skin and bones, limping. He turns away. He's late for a meeting. It's not his problem. But in that moment, something subtle shifts inside him. A tiny fracture. Not because he didn't have time, but because he forgot to see. He forgot that life was looking at him through those broken eyes, and that the universe keeps score, not with numbers, but with energetic weight. Cayce warned that as the earth enters higher vibrational states, our ability to harm will begin to bounce back faster. He spoke of a time when thoughts and intentions would manifest rapidly, where cruelty would echo back with intensity, and compassion would ripple like wildfire. That time, he said, would be both a blessing and a test. And what's being tested is humanity's heart. The warning wasn't about punishment. It was about alignment. He believed the earth itself is a living, breathing organism, and animals are not merely inhabitants, they're nervous systems, sensors, balancers. When we harm them, we disrupt that ecosystem, both physically and spiritually. Is it any wonder that as the abuse of animals rises, so too does anxiety, depression, violence? The earth is out of sync because its children are out of harmony. But it's not too late. Cayce also said that even a single act of compassion can reset karma, that choosing love again and again realigns us with the divine current. So what does this mean practically? It means when we rescue instead of abandon, we rise. When we feed the stray, cradle the wounded, protect the voiceless, we participate in evolution. And not just for the dog, for ourselves. There's a parable told by a native elder. A boy asks, "Why do dogs live shorter lives than humans?" The elder smiles, "Because they already know how to love. Humans have to learn." What if that's true? What if dogs are here not just to comfort us, but to test us, to see if we've grown enough to care without reward, to protect without possession, to love without condition? Cayce once said, "The soul develops through service to others," and in his view, others included the silent ones, those without language, without defense, without agendas. Dogs in this light aren't just companions. They're living invitations. Invitations to serve, to soften, to remember who we were before the walls went up. So maybe the next time you see a wounded dog, or hear one cry at night, or pass one by on a lonely street, don't turn away. Don't say, "It's not mine to fix," because maybe it is. Maybe it's your soul's test, a moment disguised as a stray, a spiritual exam written in fur, pain, and silence. And what you do next might be the difference between forgetting and awakening. Edgar Cayce often spoke of a coming shift, a time when humanity would awaken from its spiritual sleep and begin to remember what it means to live in harmony, not just with each other, but with all living beings. He called it the rise of the new earth. But what he described wasn't a new planet. It was a new consciousness, a reordering of values, a remembering of the soul. In this new earth, Cayce said, the walls that separate kingdoms, animal, human, divine, would begin to dissolve. We would no longer see life in vertical hierarchies, with humans at the top and animals beneath us, but as interwoven threads in one vast soul tapestry, each thread carrying intelligence, presence, and purpose. And as this shift unfolds, something profound is happening in plain sight. Animals are awakening, and not just reacting, but relating. Not just surviving, but communing, especially dogs. Across the world, stories emerge of dogs acting with astonishing intuition, sensing illness, predicting seizures, identifying trauma in children, even finding people lost in the wilderness when humans could not. Are these just instincts, or are we witnessing the first lights of conscious soul expression? Cayce might say, we are. That these animals are beginning to show signs of what he called soul individuation. The moment a being starts not just existing, but awakening to its own spiritual nature. In his readings, Cayce hinted that dogs and other animals deeply bonded to humans may be walking the early stages of a soul path. Not human souls in disguise, but souls in their own sacred evolution, learning loyalty, empathy, courage, in forms perfectly suited to those lessons. Imagine this: a child grows up isolated, bullied at school, ignored at home, but every day his dog meets him at the door. Tail wagging, eyes soft, presence absolute. Over the years, this dog becomes more than a friend. He becomes a witness to the boy's pain, his victories, his tears, his silent prayers. And then, one day, the dog passes. But something lingers, a strange sense that he wasn't just a dog, but a soul companion, sent to guard the light in the child until he could carry it himself. Cayce believed in what we might call soul contracts, sacred arrangements made before birth between souls. Most of us think those contracts are only between people. But what if that's not true? What if, in the realm between worlds, a dog chose to walk beside you? For a season, for a lesson, for a healing. What if their short lifespan isn't a flaw, but a gift? A concentrated burst of unconditional love, offer just long enough to change us and then release us back to ourselves. As this new earth unfolds, we're being asked to let go of the illusion of superiority, to stop seeing ourselves as masters of creation, and begin remembering ourselves as participants in a sacred ecosystem of souls. Dogs are among the first to teach us this because they've been watching us, forgiving us, loving us for thousands of years. And now, they're no longer just following us, they're calling us to wake up, to soften, to reconnect. In a world of distraction and noise, they offer silence. In a world of transaction, they offer presence. In a world of judgment, they offer unfiltered love. Edgar Cayce saw a day when humanity would finally understand that consciousness isn't limited to language, intellect, or opposable thumbs. He saw a future where humans and animals would relate soul to soul, not as owner and pet, but as fellow travelers. And perhaps that future is not in the distance. Perhaps it's already here, in the eyes of the dog resting at your feet, in the memory of one who changed your life, in the ache you feel when they're gone, not just because you lost a companion, but because you recognized in them a piece of the divine. The rise of animal souls is not about giving them human qualities. It's about honoring the soul they've always had and realizing that their presence was never ordinary, it was sacred. So as we move forward into this strange, sacred future, may we walk more slowly, listen more deeply, love more purely. And when we forget how, may we look to the ones who never needed to be taught, the ones who came with their hearts wide open, their loyalty unshakable, their souls already shining. And maybe, just maybe, the new earth isn't something we're building from scratch. Maybe it's something that's been waiting for us all along. In every quiet moment, in every act of compassion, in every dog who ever looked up at us as if to say, "I'm already here. I've always been here." Are you ready to remember? You've heard the prophecy. You've seen the signs. And maybe, deep down, you've always known it was true. That dogs aren't here just to sit at our feet. They're here to walk beside our souls, to teach us love without conditions, loyalty without reason, and presence without distraction. Edgar Cayce didn't ask us to worship them. He asked us to recognize them as spiritual companions, as fellow beings on the path, as mirrors of the best we can become. So here's the question. Has a dog ever changed your life? Do you feel like they knew your heart before you even spoke? Did they arrive when you needed them most, or leave before you were ready? If so, share your story in the comments, because your story may be the one that wakes someone else up. And if this message touched you, if it reminded you of something sacred, like, subscribe, and help spread this truth to others who may have forgotten. This isn't just a video, it's a small spark in the collective soul. And the more we remember together, the more this new earth becomes not a dream, but a reality. Until next time, hug your dog a little longer, look into their eyes a little deeper, and know that you are not alone. You never were.